Welcome back. I'm going to talk about baseball. Yep. I'm going to talk about baseball and the issue with baseball as it stands. So, baseball's changed the rules this year to speed up the game. And that seems to have worked. Speeding up the game, and it needed some speeding up. I mean, seriously, it was getting ridiculous. Games were getting to 4 hours in length, and it's not like they were an exciting 4 hours of baseball. It was just 4 hours of baseball, and the longer a baseball game is, the less exciting it tends to be. I am a big fan of games which are pitching duels. Part of the reason I like the pitching duels is because it's fast, because you have two pitchers that are doing their best to outduel one another. And we don't really have the pitching duels like we used to back in the day. Pitching is treated quite differently. Hitters are different. The game has changed. Now, while the game has changed, and there's a lot of analytics with baseball. Now, as somebody who normally does hockey videos, analytics I think are part of the picture with baseball or with hockey. I think it's a bigger part of the story with baseball. I think analytics can tell you a lot more, and I've seen the movie Moneyball many times over. It's one of my favorite movies, and sadly the A's, moving to Vegas now and all that. But outside of that, there's one thing with baseball that always to me kind of looms over it: cheating. And it's part of the game. It's been part of the game for over a century. There have been accusations of cheating that aren't on the board, whether it's players throwing a game or managers throwing a game or franchises wanting to see a game get like it's just there are situations that crop up where people look, scratch their heads, and say, "What's going on there?" As of, for instance, Aaron Judge against the Toronto Blue Jays the other day. There's been speculation about why he's looking off towards the dugout. Were they stealing signs? And then when he hits a home run right after, that's going to lead to that speculation being higher. Now, I'm going to say this. To me, stealing signs, I find it... baseball in general, I find really odd in how the game is played. That you have this secret game plan, the other team can't know your game plan. And I understand the upset over, say you got a guy on second base, he can see what the catcher is doing, and if he can signal to the batter what's coming, that's problematic. And I understand. I understand that stealing signs is bad, but at the same time, it's weird, and I wonder how that evolved to be. This is a game that when baseball was at its inception was basically two-pitch. You were supposed to, as the pitcher, throw the ball so that the batter could hit it. That was the plan. And then in the late 1800s, that changed. And it became, okay, now pitchers are trying to strike them out. And then the addition of balls and strikes was brought in shortly thereafter because you have to. Otherwise, pitchers are throwing them in locations you have no chance of hitting them, and you can swing at it or wait. So Domingo Germán was ejected from the game after the Aaron Judge incident, also against the Blue Jays, for a foreign substance. And the umpire said that was the stickiest hand he has ever gone out to a mound and felt. And that's a problem. That's a major problem. But pitchers using a foreign substance is not new. It's not new at all. We all remember Phil Niekro and I'm going to go ahead and pull out my pockets. Oh, what's that? It's an emery board? Where did that come from? Yeah, thrown out of the game. So doctoring the ball is something that's been done forever. Whether it's, the old emery board, you'd scratch it. You'd have the spit too. Spitball. And whatever they can do to get an advantage. And of course, the advantage is simple. The ball should take a trajectory that makes some sense out of the pitcher's hand. With foreign substances, with various ways that they could doctor the ball, that ball could go anywhere. And it's really hard for the batter to pick it up. I would imagine it might be a nightmare for the catcher as well. But as long as the batter can't hit it, that's the concern, right? So there's that. There's the grip on the ball too, which of course comes through whether or not your hands are sticky. Maybe you get a more firm grip on the ball and all that fun stuff. But then there's also doctoring the bats, cork bats. And I don't think cork bats get picked up as much now as they used to. I don't hear about it as much as they used to. I think the technology with the equipment has changed so that cork bats would probably be a little more difficult to get away with. A little bit more difficult to pull off than in the past. But they're a thing. And it was simple. You lighten up the bat, you can really get a good swing on it, and you're trying to get an advantage. It's the only sport I can think of where cheating is really part and parcel of it. Now, I mean, the NFL, you've heard of it. There were players, linebackers that would use Pam oven spray on their shoulders so you can't get a grip. So you go to hit them and you just slide right off. But baseball, it feels like it's just part of the game, and sign stealing is a big part of it. The Red Sox were fined for using an Apple Watch to relay stolen signs, and of course, the Astros. The Astros, and everybody hates the Astros, and I get it, and I'm not a fan of Houston as a winning team either, but the reality is this is a sport that was kind of built on cheating. We've come out of an entire era that was dominated by cheating with the steroids. And HGH is still there too, where, that's still being tested for, and every now and then you'll see a guy get suspended, and then it's a question of, okay, so was he using it for an advantage? Did he have an injury? He's using it to try to get over an injury. Was he taking those HGH, the human growth hormones, in something else and didn't realize it was there? But it again is about power. I remember, the earliest I remember with baseball with the power was in the early 90s. I want to say late 80s, early 90s, when it felt like Brian Downing went from a pretty good hitter who was, he was pretty well built, and then all of a sudden, just Hulk Hogan arms. I was like, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, he's this huge home run hitter, and he's built like a brick house. Okay, cool. But it was pretty clear that players decided to go for the home runs, and of course, home runs equal money. You can be a 250, 300 hitter, but if you have power, you're going to make more money than the 250, 300 hitter who doesn't have power. And so that's part and parcel here of, you get those home runs, you get that money, you get all the fame. I mean, we all, those old enough to remember, we all remember McGuire and Sosa, and that who's going to win the home run derby this year, McGuire or Sosa. And they were both just ridiculous with their power, and then Barry Bonds ends up being just as ridiculous, if not more. And of course, you chase down the all-time home run record, and now those record books are just all just tainted. None of those guys go into the Hall of Fame. And now we're starting to see the argument of, well, shouldn't we let them in the Hall of Fame? My answer is, if you're going to let them in the Hall of Fame, well, now you're starting down this slippery slope. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but baseball's been pretty clear about throwing guys out who break the rules, except the Astros. And I say that without any meaning to be sarcastic or anything, because, yeah, Pete Rose, they banned for life for gambling. I'm not saying they shouldn't have, but there was no turning back on that. And, of course, if you look back to the 1919 Black Sox scandal, which, of course, leads to the movie Field of Dreams and all the talk about Shoeless Joe Jackson, and he was banned for life because of the Black Sox scandal. And Major League Baseball made it so that that doesn't change when a player passes away. So in other words, if Pete Rose were to pass over the next couple of years, they can't retroactively say, okay, well, we'll put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, which leads to that argument of whether or not they should be in the Hall of Fame, whether or not players who have done wrong things should be in the Hall of Fame if they've been banned from the game. Altering the grounds is one, too, that I found when I was, researching for this video. And it's interesting because the batter's box has been messed with. The groundskeeper that was responsible for that was suspended. Height of the pitcher's mound can be altered as well, depending on who's pitching. You might want a taller pitcher's mound depending on who's pitching that game. It gives an advantage to the pitcher. And Metrodome. There was the speculation about whether or not the Minnesota Twins actually manipulated the airflow inside the Metrodome to help their players, and somebody who was responsible for some of that said, yep, when he was done working with the team, like, yeah, no, there's home field advantage, and the airflow in the Metrodome is part of that. It is really weird that this is a sport that's basically, you've got the pitcher and the batter, and I love that with baseball. I love how it's 1 versus 1, and you've got a catcher behind the plate who's trying to figure out the tendencies, and maybe you'll have a pitcher and a catcher who aren't quite on the same page. And who's going to win this battle? Is the catcher going to talk the pitcher into, pitching his way? Or is the pitcher going to say no and shake off enough signs the catcher's like, fine? But the reality is that all of the other things that go on around baseball, I think, overshadow it. Now, this is, of course, at a time where it feels like baseball has lost some of its popularity. I don't think it's as popular with younger people in the younger generation than other sports. And so it makes it more difficult for baseball. Going forward. Of course, there's the strikes in the '80s, which didn't help with baseball, and in the '90s, Expos fans will never forget the lost season. Because as an Expos fan, I really felt like they were going to win the World Series that year, and I still, to this day, feel robbed of a World Series championship for the Expos. I'm a big Expos fan at the time, and if the Expos ever come back, I will be quite overjoyed with that. But it is interesting to see that in this day and age where the technology advances so far, I don't know if they can stay ahead of the cheating much longer. I mean we're into a stage now where I think the stealing of signs will get easier and harder to pick up. I would think that players who are cheating with not necessarily steroids, but with various hormones, you know when to take them, when to stop, and all of that. Even with steroids, there was definitely talks about how to get around the testing and how to fool the testing. There were players that I think fooled the testing for years before getting caught. But how do you navigate this? How do you like if you're in charge of the game? How do you fix this? How like and to me, speeding up the game is great, and trying to make sure it's as level a playing field as possible in game is great. But I don't know. I don't know how. Because again, I think it's affected my ability to really enjoy the game. When I'm trying to watch and I tune into a Jays game and I see the pitcher getting thrown out for illegal substance on his hands, after throwing a pretty good start to the game, you go, okay, so that shouldn't count, right? Like if you're playing a game with somebody and you find out that they're cheating, you kind of start over. You can't do that with a sport, and yet all those batters that he got out with that ball he was doctoring, thanks to the fact he had all the sticky stuff going on. Well, I mean, the Yankees already got that advantage from all those players that he got out. So I think there's more work to be done as well, but it's a sport that has always had various scandals around it, and I don't know that that's ever going to go away. And so on some level, it makes it harder for me to enjoy it because there's times where I'll hear a noise while I'm watching, or I'll watch somebody on second base and I'll think, somebody sign stealing here? Because again, the trash can lids for the Astros, right? You could tell what was coming. And so they used that to their advantage and they won. The sad part is, it doesn't mean the Astros would not have been winners without it. It just made it easier. They were still a very good team, but it made it easier. And there's a fairness to the way that you play sports that I don't feel like is as prominent with baseball. And I don't know how you fix that either. It just feels like there's the we have to win and we'll do whatever it takes to win. And if you agree with that, then great. But baseball, I don't know if the rules need to change. Maybe baseball comes out in a few years and says, you know what? If guys are stealing signs, we're fine with it. We're fine with it. We're just going to, because technology's gone so far, whatever. You want to steal signs, you can. And then what, right? I've never liked the idea that pitchers can throw at batters for reason B. Like, oh, they threw at our guy, we throw at their guy, because you can injure a guy throwing a baseball at his head. It's just how it works. It's a baseball. They hurt. They're going at about 90 miles an hour. I would think if you're throwing at the batter, you don't throw it 90 miles an hour. But again, that's me. I wouldn't throw it at somebody. But that's how I look at it. But it is a sport that there are certain rules. I always thought it was weird too that, if the ball's up in the mid or up in between second and third base and a guy yells out, "I got it," but it's the base runner that yells that, and then the guy who's going to catch the ball kind of looks around, the ball hits the ground, that's considered really poor sportsmanship, and that's a terrible thing to do. When almost any sporting that I did in elementary, middle school, high school, I mean, if I could call out and confuse the other guy, even with hockey, you can see like a beaver tap behind a guy, and especially if he used to be your teammate, like, hey, and you can call him by his nickname because you know what everybody calls him, and then the guy passes you the puck. That's just how it works. Is there deception? Yes. But is it cheating? I don't think it's cheating. I don't think it's cheating, but that's me. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. How should baseball fix this? Because it does feel like, A, there needs to probably be stricter punishments so that pitchers won't be doing this crap anymore and make it so that this goes away. And how would you navigate the fact that technology is going to make it a heck of a lot easier to figure out what pitch is coming next at bat than in the past? Let me know your thoughts on that. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.